All right, everyone. It is now 12 o'clock p.m., so we will get started. So first of all, hello and welcome to our webinar today called Securing Permanent Space, featuring the Stratford Perth Museum and the Theatre Centre. Excuse me. My name is Amy Poole, and I am the Program Manager for ArtsBuild Ontario. We are pleased to introduce our presenters, Stratford Perth Museum's General Manager John Kastner and former Artistic Director of the Theatre Centre, Franco Boni. This is the 9th and final webinar in our Creative Space Case Studies webinar series, a series which highlights several creative space capital projects from our case study series. We appreciate everyone's attendance today during this uncertain time, and we're really looking forward to engaging with you today as our presenters take us through the story of their respective projects to secure permanent space. So, before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping items to go over. So first of all, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in. You can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting. So as a quick test, can everyone please type in a quick yes or no if you can hear me clearly? Okay, perfect. I have one no, so I would recommend, Mark, if you would like to maybe close and reopen the Adobe Connect. Sometimes it can be a little finicky, so see if that works, and if not, then we will help troubleshoot with you very soon. Okay, so as another note, we will be recording this session, and it will be emailed to you along with the PowerPoint presentation following the webinar, so please keep an eye out in your inbox for that. We will also be emailing out a quick survey following the session. We ask that you please complete the survey so that we can continue to develop programs that respond to the current needs of creative spaces. Finally, we will have roughly about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer questions from everyone. Please use the chat box on the bottom right to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as possible in our time span. So if you are new to this Creative Spaces case study or have not heard of us before, ArtsBuild Ontario is a nonprofit arts organization which offers programs and learning opportunities related to the building, managing, and financing of sustainable creative spaces across Ontario. ArtsBuild Ontario also recognizes that our work takes place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, Atawandarong, Petun, Cree, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Métis. Our mandate is to support arts facilities and creative spaces, which is inclusive of physical buildings and of the land itself. The Creative Spaces Case Study Series covers the creative spaces projects of 19 organizations across Ontario. Capital projects range from major and minor renovations to new builds entirely. 19 case studies from organizations such as the Tet Centre in Kingston, the Dundas Museum and Archives in Dundas, the Lighthouse Festival Theatre in Port Dover, and more are readily accessible on ArtsBuild Ontario's website in both English and French. Additional formats such as large print and audio recordings are also available for these case studies as well. All of these case studies are available on our webpage shown at the bottom of the slide, along with a complete best practices summary which collects data from these 19 case studies. To support the Creative Spaces Case Study series, this webinar series includes 9 webinars that highlight various creative space capital projects from our list of these 19 creative space projects. Each webinar is led by arts leaders who were involved in many or all aspects of their respective capital project. Previous webinars featured the Westdale Theatre in Hamilton, Idea Exchange in Cambridge, the Canadian Automotive Museum in Oshawa, and many more. Today's webinar will be split into 2 sections as well. The first section will feature John Kastner and the Stratford Perth Museum, and the second will feature Franco Boni and the Theatre Centre. Presenters will speak on acquiring space for arts and heritage organizations, focusing on their spaces and the unique processes surrounding them. I would also like to mention that this webinar will run from 12 o'clock till 1 o'clock, so we will have about an hour together. Following this introduction, I will hand it over to our first presenter. And as a kind reminder, after the presentation, there will be about 10 minutes for questions, discussion, and our wrap-up. So please feel free to type in your questions in the chat located at the bottom right of the screen, and we will answer as many questions as we can towards the end. We are pleased to introduce our first presenter, John Kastner. John has been the General Manager of the Stratford Perth Museum since 2013. In that period, the museum changed its focus from hyper-local exhibits to presentations of a higher profile, including Shakespeare's First Folio, a traveling exhibit from the Anne Frank House, and exhibits about Harper Lee, and most notably, the well-attended Justin Bieber exhibit. Previously, John was in the newspaper industry for 33 years, retiring as the managing editor of the Stratford Beacon Herald. He is a graduate of Wilfrid Laurier University with a double major of English and History. In addition to the museum, John is actively involved in athletics and sits on the board of the Ontario Hockey Federation, a number of Hockey Canada committees, and he is also the commissioner of the Intercounty Baseball League. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic to him.
Well, thanks very much. Amy, and it's an honor to be requested to present here on behalf of ArtsBuild Ontario. Just as a little bit of background, ArtsBuild Ontario was very instrumental in the museum for our strategic plan and built an assets management plan for us moving forward so that we can have some sort of idea about what our expenses will be moving forward. When Amy approached me about this, I think one of the most interesting things was the unique processes that different culture and heritage institutions have gone through. And I think the Stratford Perth Museum, everybody's different, but our process was quite unique, I would say. The Stratford Perth Museum is currently in the house that you see on your screen right now. It's an 1874 buff brick house. It's right on Highway 8 between Stratford and Lake Huron. And that house has really served as sort of the centerpiece of the museum. As we'll hear a little bit in the presentation, there's a 10,000 square foot addition that's been added to it and a number of developments that have taken place. I think the thing that makes this so unique is that the museum itself, despite only being in this house since 2008, has had what I would describe as somewhat jokingly, a nomadic existence. In the early part of the last century, the city of Stratford and the county of Perth began to collect artifacts, and for a couple of decades they were stored in the basement of the library. Then there really was not much of a collection at all. It was part of a private collection, often referred to as the Minnie Thompson Museum, which was on a farm at the edge of the city of Stratford. That was obviously less than ideal. A lot of things were stored in barns or actually in farmers' fields. In the 1970s, the city and the county became interested in some sort of permanent home. And in 1992, the Stratford Perth Museum had its first permanent home in a factory on the edge of downtown. And then the 90s, during the same time, a lot of our artifacts and collection were in storage facilities. In 98, we moved to the Discovery Center, and then now we're in our current location. So we sort of jokingly talk about some of the artifacts that are in our 20,000 item collection room. A lot of them have been moved 6, 7, 8 times. We joke sometimes we have things like a bell from the post office that weighs just over 1,000 pounds. And it's been moved by volunteers 2 or 3 times, and I'm often surprised that it got moved more than once. I thought after somebody moved it one time, that would be it, and we're not moving it again. But a dedicated core of volunteers has really been integral to the museum's existence and continues to be today. This is the museum's first permanent home. It's a furniture factory just on the edge of downtown. It was a good location for the museum in as much as they could store a lot of its collection. It was a little bit out of the way, and in 1998, this building became available. It's a former teacher's college or normal school. It is a couple of 100 feet from the Stratford Festival, and the Stratford Perth Museum Association was formed and took over this property and began to rent it from the Ontario Realty Corp as this building became surplus. That would have appeared to have been a critical point for the museum, where all of a sudden it was able to have a permanent home, a master of its own domain, start to make changes. And again, you're across from the Stratford Festival that draws about 500,000 people a year. That didn't work out as planned. The Stratford Festival became a tenant. The province of Ontario was the landlord. They began to put other people in there, and the museum became less of the primary tenant and became more of a secondary tenant. One of the crazy scenarios is that this building here, which is the former railway repair shops in Stratford, a massive, massive 250,000 square foot building in downtown Stratford, a lot of our artifacts were stored in this building. And that's how the building looks today, and it doesn't look a whole lot different than it did when a lot of our artifacts were there. Now, artifacts, in fairness, were stored in another part of the building, but nonetheless, it's a little bit astounding that that would be the home to some of our 20,000 artifacts. This building, by the way, survived 2 significant fires, and so did the museum's collection. Which brings us to this location here. So the Stratford Perth Museum Association was formed in 2007 with the idea of having a permanent home. This building here was for sale, and I would suggest that the museum board had great vision in acquiring this property. It is outside of Stratford, and sometimes we think we'd like to be downtown. But in all honesty, it's on 9 acres of property, and particularly during COVID, that has been an absolute godsend for us. We have 6, 7 weddings a year on the property. We had some concerts last weekend. We have another concert scheduled for this weekend, all of which are outside. We run school programming, etc. So now to get into the nuts and bolts of how this took place. This building was purchased for $565,000. There was a $1 million addition put on the building, and which brings us to about 10,000 square feet. As much as it was a great vision and a great idea and has really led to the current success of the museum, it was not without its problems. A capital campaign, which was very successful, raised $500,000, essentially purchased the property. A $400,000 grant from the federal government did not come through. Work had started on the project before the grant was approved, and that rendered the museum ineligible, despite the fact the grant process was very well along. The board went to the city of Stratford and the county of Perth, and they agreed to hold a mortgage on the property of $585,000, which allowed the museum to complete, its construction. They then held a second mortgage and made the museum somewhat leveraged, I would say, but in many ways it really set the foundation for the museum's current success. The county and the city were also funders of the museum, and they currently fund about 45% of the museum's annual expenses of about $500,000 or so. And the mortgage and the second mortgage are also being paid back. So it is there is some money that comes in and then flows back. I think the major thing that happened, and ArtsBuild Ontario was involved in this as well, is after the construction was complete, the relationship with ArtsBuild Ontario began. The construction, as you can see here on this slide here, there was no general contractor. There was an architect involved who provided some professional oversight. The project was essentially managed. The day-to-day oversight was by the museum board, and the board chair at the time was sort of the project manager. All very well intended, and I would argue really set the framework for our current success, but by their own admission, probably not their skill set. And some of the assets in the building are not, what I would argue now, and people on this call would probably agree, are not particularly museum-centric. In 2013, we sold a quarter of the property to the county of Perth, and they built the new archives building there. So we recovered $125,000, and the benefit of that is it's created great synergies with the museum and the archives. We share a parking lot, and there's lots of people that go back and forth across the parking lot from the museum to the archives and then back again. And it really has created what we refer to as an historical campus. So what we have now is we have an exhibit space that is significant. We have a 75% to scale replica of the last train repaired in Stratford. We have a number of vehicles that are in the exhibit space at the museum. In addition to that, we now have what I would call a very museum environment. We've got a climate controlled collection room that has LED lighting, and those are some of the changes that we've been able to make as a result of owning our own building. Previously, the museum was either homeless or a tenant, and we were able to, because of acquiring our own building, we're able to make some changes. These are highlighted on this screen here. So since 2013, these are the capital changes that we've been able to make to the museum. So you saw on a previous screen about some of the curation of curated and performance spaces. We have LED lighting throughout the museum. We have great highway signage as a result of the archives being there. There's been some major structural repairs, HVAC units, which helped in the climate control system. We had to bring in security systems, additional security system, because a number of the exhibits we had, including Shakespeare's First Folio, the Anne Frank House exhibit, the foremost collection of Inuit art from the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Franklin exhibit from the ROM, and so on. This year, we installed a natural gas generator, which will give the museum uninterrupted power in the event of storms or hydro interruption from Hydro One. We installed a stormwater pond. At the same time, did 6,000 square feet of parking. You saw on a previous screen our bell tower. And then very museum-centric assets, we installed Past Perfect, museum-wide Wi-Fi, a gift shop, and so on. One of our new revenue streams is weddings and outdoor events at the museum. And since 2013, we've done $400,000 in capital improvements. And I could say that the majority of those, nearly all of it, was either gifts in kind, or in addition to that, it was cultural spaces or provincial grants, museum operating program grants. All of that wouldn't have been possible had the board in 2008 not made a decision that the museum needed to have its own home. When it was a tenant, there wasn't the ability to make capital changes or even make significant infrastructure changes because you really were a tenant. So moving to ownership, as challenging as it was, has really been transformational for the museum. This area here, for example, is our performance space. We hold a number of events here. We show the Justin Bieber movie on a loop pre-COVID. This is a Business After 5 event with the Chamber of Commerce. We've had weddings back here, birthday parties, even receptions after funerals for board members. It's been an important revenue stream for us as well. There's a couple of shots of the exhibit space. The Justin Bieber exhibit's on the left, and one of our exhibit spaces in our old house in the original building is on the right. And we reference the property. On the right, you'll see that's a craft beer festival that we had for a number of years, which was incredibly popular. And there's a wedding that took place there's a picture of a wedding that's on the right. And particularly during COVID, the property has become an incredible asset. Sort of unforeseen. We always knew that it was a really nice aspect of the museum, that we did have a kilometer of trail system and a stormwater pond, etc. But now during COVID, that's become very important. It's really key to our programming, also our special events, and revenue stream. So there's a picture, an aerial shot that was taken last year during a wedding at the museum. So the museum obviously is on the right, and you can see the newly constructed Stratford Perth Archives on the left, and that's our historical campus at the Stratford Perth Museum. I hope I touched on the importance of the museum having its own home, the importance of it having the addition. All of our collection now is in one location in a curated and museum-specific environment that's climate controlled with LED lighting and air conditioning and forced air heating and cooling. And I think that in reflection, the people who had the vision of the museum having its own space It was not without its stumbles, to be sure, but it really did set the foundation for the museum. The debt that the museum incurred was not insignificant, but I can tell you that it's a debt that we've been able to manage thanks to the two municipalities of the city of Stratford and the county of Perth. And even during COVID, I can say the museum is okay, and I think it's a viable operation because of some of the other revenue streams. But by and large, the biggest thing is it is the master of its own domain, and the fact that it owns the building is really paved the way for not only its current success but future success. So that's my presentation, and I guess Amy will entertain questions at the end, or however you like.
Thank you, John. We'll do questions at the end. If you could also please just mute your microphone for now, that would be great. Thank you so much for that great presentation. That was really it was great to hear about kind of that story of what led to the acquisition of the space, and then kind of everything that happened afterward. We will now be moving on to our our second session of today's webinar, highlighting the capital project of the Theatre Center. From 2003 to 2019, Franco Boni served as the artistic director of the Theatre Center, leading the company in a $6 million capital campaign and in the building of its new performance venue in Toronto. Franco also previously served as artistic director of the Push Festival and artistic producer of the Summer Works Festival. Additionally, Franco co-founded the Buddies in Bad Times Queer Youth Program in 1999. Franco is the inaugural recipient of the Ken McDougall Award for Emerging Directors and was awarded the Rita Davies Cultural Leadership Award, recognizing his outstanding leadership in the developing and arts and culture in the city of Toronto. Most recently, Franco received the George Lustig Mentorship Award in Theatre. With that, we'd like to turn our phones over to Franco.
Hello. Hi. I hope people can hear me. I just want to thank Amy and everyone at ArtsBuild for including the Theatre Center story in today's presentation. As you heard from John, every campaign is unique, and I hope that some of what I share with you today will offer some insight in your own journey in securing space for the communities you serve. I want to make people aware that I'm no longer at the Theatre Center. I resigned as artistic and executive director in 2019, roughly 5 years after opening the new facility. The mission statement that I'm sharing with you, I need to get to the next slide. The mission statement that I'm sharing with you is from that time. That's an image of the building, the Theatre Center. Ashlyn Rose is the new AED, and under her leadership, the mission and values of the organization will shift, as they should. Okay, so for me, it's important to understand a few things about the Theatre Center before I launch into the story of the campaign. So the Theatre Center was founded by a collection of small independent theatre companies devoted to new work. Its leadership model was collaborative, chaotic, and catalytic. It defied convention. It did not serve one artistic vision, but many. And so this informed my leadership, but it also informed the capital campaign. The Theatre Center has always had a space, but like the Perth Stratford Museum, it's been a nomadic journey. It's operated 13 venues in its history. Are people having a hard time hearing me? I says there's a double audio. We hear a phone call on top of Franco. Anyway, I'll just continue. And finally, since the early 90s, the Theatre Center situated itself in the West Queen West neighborhood of Parkdale. When I arrived at the Theatre Center, the company was in the basement of a century-old Great Hall. It was a dump of a space. But as Jane Jacobs says, old ideas can sometimes use new buildings, but new ideas must use old buildings. I want to draw your attention to one program stream in particular that has been at the center of it all, and residency. So the Theatre Center essentially is an incubator of new work, providing artists with 2, 3, 4, or 5 years to develop a new work. It's an alternate way of working. It requires the resources of space, and so the artist is making the work in the theater where it will meet an audience. It also slows down the process of creation, and it moves the artist away from the patterns of conventional theater making that value product over process. I think it's critical to learn about the history of a place before you lead a campaign to build a cultural space within it. It's so critical to me. Like, that for me is really important. And I struggle sometimes when I say the theater center is located in West Queen West, because that's a phrase coined by real estate agents and developers looking for profit. So the neighborhood around the theater center, it's important to understand that was going through massive change. 3 developers bought up a large parcel of land and were converting light industrial buildings and live-work warehouse spaces into residential condo buildings. You know, this was happening right around the time when the theater center's tenancy at the Great Hall was threatened. And I identified a city-owned building in the neighborhood, the Carnegie Library, which is where the theater center is today, that could possibly be a new home. And it was at the heart of this new development being proposed. So I went to this meeting organized by Margie Zeidler, who at the time owned and operated the Gladstone Hotel, kind of a really important hotel and community space in the community. We brought together people from the neighborhood, the government, developers. We were all concerned about the impact these new developments were going to have on the cultural life of the community. The area was inhabited by artists who were going to be pushed out of the neighborhood. At the end of the meeting, there was a call for volunteers to join a community association called Active 18. It kind of was like an after-school club, and so I decided that I would join. And we met once every 2 weeks for over 5 years. So it was so interesting because the theater center was in the West Queen West, or the Parkdale community, for about 15 years or so at the time of that meeting. And I remember going to that community association meeting and saying, I was the artistic director of the theater center, and most of the people at that meeting said, "What is that?" And so for me, I was. It was a shock to me, because I thought, here's this cultural anchor in the community, and why don't people know about it? And I made it sort of my work, actually, since that point, to actually sort of help people understand what the role the theater center played within that community. So the community, when it came time to decide what that city building was to become, the community itself actually made the decision that it was going to be the theater center. Mostly because of the work that we had all done to engage the neighborhood and the community, to let them know who we were and what we were offering, and how we could work together to build this public space. So we secured a lease from the city for $2 a year. I just want to show some photos that when we were. Oh, I missed a slide. I'm not good with PowerPoints. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. So these are just a couple of images when we put up the hoarding around the building. And of course, we knew that people might be concerned that, because there was tons of change happening in the community and buildings were being demolished, that when we put the hoarding up, we thought, we need to somehow telegraph to the community that we're not building a condo, that this isn't a condo, that this is a a cultural space, and a public space. So we did this whole campaign, coming soon to the neighborhood, not another condo. So we transmitted this information to the street. So it was kind of it was kind of for us a real clever beginning of our campaign. Well, project management. It's really important to understand that the Theatre Centre was this tiny organization that had a $300,000 operating budget when I took it over. This is not, to raise $6.2 million, 1.7 of it being private, was just this is crazy talk. But I do want to acknowledge the role that Jenny Jinder, who was the lead consultant on the project throughout the project, that she played in securing the space for us. She was someone that I could go to with questions, advice, and counsels, and she really held my hand through the process. We, of course, had a project manager who led the construction of the project. We had a builder, an architect, but I also want to acknowledge that the board was critical, that I inherited a board at the Theatre Centre of 3 people and mostly arts focused. But a capital campaign board is different from an operations board. So leadership at the board level is critical. So Gail Packwood, who was the president throughout most of the campaign, Kevin Helfand, and then Richard Mortimer. So each of them brought a very different kind of expertise at a certain time. So, for example, Richard, who was really helped in terms of the operations. So once we got open, he was the right board member for that moment. But if I had Richard at the start of this campaign, Gail had the right kind of energy of like, yeah, let's do this. This is absolutely insane, but let's move forward with this crazy idea because I think it's an important thing for the community. The staff, we didn't have a large full-time staff leading the campaign. Rather, we brought on contractors where we needed them. Our fundraising campaign was atypical. We went through a number of fundraising consultants and most of them didn't work. Most of them told us that we couldn't raise the money. That was the result of the first fundraising feasibility study, said that we could only raise $300,000. I guess just a word of caution around fundraising consultants, in my experience. So this is the budget. So you can see that the majority of the campaign funding came from government, and that private sector campaign of 1.7 was raised, and mind you, was not raised. It had to be raised after as we were building. So I can see that there are questions, but I'll just continue really quickly because I think the questions I want to respond. So I'll just go to a new slide. So strategic partnerships. So there's 3 many strategic partnerships, but Active 18, who I spoke about, was a community association. The city councillor, who at the time was Anna Bailao, who was hugely supportive of the project, and when city staff really didn't want to make decisions, or we didn't feel empowered to make decisions, Anna, who was the city councillor, elected city councillor, really gathered together the community at the city, the staff at the city, to sort of push the project forward. So she was major. The local developers were important, but it was really it's important to understand that they also leave. They're there in the community for a short period of time and then they leave. I'm going to successes and challenges. I mean, there's so many, but the few that I put down is the bar and cafe. I didn't want to build the theater unless there was a cafe connected to it. Not because I saw it as a money maker, but I thought of it as a social enterprise and as a point and as a place where the community could come in and gather without feeling like they needed to purchase a ticket or buy something. You could, so we at first rented the cafe out to a private organization and realized that was not a good idea. And so we took on the operations of the cafe. And it was terrifying because we knew we were going to lose money, but we knew that over the next couple of years that it would pay for itself, and it has. Our loan, I mean, I'm running out of time, so I'm being mindful. Obviously we couldn't secure a loan with a private banking institution. So we went to the Community Forward Fund with the help of Adele and ArtsBuild Ontario to secure a loan for the construction of the space. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about build a theater and nurture a public space, and that I think that it's really important that the Theatre Centre set out to build a theater, but that what I think changed through its campaign was its recognition that the theater actually belonged to the community and the public that it was serving, and so defining how that space was going to be used was just as much as important as it was for the artists who it was built for. It was also became a real community space, and I'll just say there's one project that we began, which is called the Condo Project, that worked with one condominium building in the neighborhood. And of course, you can imagine many condos were built to help them, to ask them, what do they need from a theater, a community theater? And so we co-designed a program for those residents. And for 18 months, there was a whole bunch of programming in the space that wasn't, it was artful, but it wasn't theater, performance-based. That was for them. I'm going to show a video because I think it gives you a sense of the physical space and talks a little bit about the program. It's old, but it gives you an idea of what the Theatre Centre was trying to achieve. Amy, are you able to play the video? It's 2 minutes long.
Yep, I can pull it up right now.
The Theatre Centre has been in this community for over 20 years. But it wasn't until March 2014 when we opened our permanent new home in the renovated former Carnegie Library, where the company's transformation took hold. We grew beyond our function as an arts venue. Instead of opening our doors at 8 p.m. for showtimes, we opened at 8 a.m. We hired a baker to bake fresh baked goods and offer breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We offered free Wi-Fi, comfortable seating, and invited people from our community to just hang out. Our production manager cooks plus an inexpensive monthly meal open to the public. Our scientist in residence, a neurologist Center for Addiction and Mental Health, our neighbor, teaches her University of Toronto Theatre and Medicine class here. And our lobby doesn't feature show posters, but showcases the artwork of living young artists. We have embraced our new role as a cultural hub and have become a place where city building, civic engagement, the environment, astronomy, science, and performance intersect. The scope and complexity in our world today necessitates artists to make art that encourages entire communities to imagine new ways of living together. Leadership in the cultural community is being responsible for communicating to the public.
Great, thank you so much. Franco, if you could please unmute your microphone very quickly.
Thank you so much.
Just to reduce echo.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's just there's a bit of an echo, so if you could please mute your
Oh.
microphone. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
go ahead. Sorry, I'll unmute. Okay, so if that is the end, then we'll be entering Q&A. Franco, if you could just please mute your microphone, that will reduce echo going on. Perfect, thank you. Awesome, thank you so much. So thank you both to John and Franco for that for both of these great presentations, for going into all these really intricate details, which is great. So now we are going to be entering our Q&A. For right now, we'll be I'll be relaying questions to you both, John and Franco, from the questions that we have, and I'll mute myself when when you'd like to answer. So. Yes, so in terms of questions, we have one for John from Bob Crockett. So this question is, did you face pushback for competing with?
No, we didn't really. And I think one of the reasons is the museum is a pretty unique environment. And we weren't I don't think we were in competition with anybody else who was doing something similar. We essentially rent out the property, and people rent their own tent, get their own caterers, and so on. So we weren't in real competition with anybody. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons. But no, we didn't get any pushback at all.
Great, thank you. And when done, if you could just please mute your microphone, then that will reduce any echo. Perfect, awesome, thank you. And we have a question for Franco from Pam Patel. So Pam asks, was there criticism from the artistic community that the city chose the theater center, questioning why another organization wasn't chosen? Or was it met more with communal support because of the crucial incubator role that?
I would say that because the theater center had been in that neighborhood for such a long time, and that it felt like the obvious choice. But honestly, the community wasn't thinking that a theater needed to be part of the urban plan and redesign of that neighborhood. It was only through the involvement, my involvement and the theater center's involvement in Active 18, where we made a commitment to the neighborhood, to learn about the neighborhood, and to try to understand how we could be of service, that the decision became obvious. We didn't really even have to convince anybody, because the developers, the city, and the community all identified the theater center as the ideal candidate for the cultural space. At one point, it was really surprising to me because I was like, why isn't anybody talking about the Carnegie Library? And one of the lawyers involved in the case said, well, it's because everybody agrees that it should be the theater center. So we're not spending a lot of time thinking about it. We just know it's going to happen.
Great, thank you very much. For our next question, it's once again for Franco from Joni Carroll with the Calgary Arts Development. So Joni asks, what are your annual operating costs for community programming? And then Joni mentioned it's important to build these costs in from the beginning of the
So yeah, no, it's a really important question, and I can't say what it is now because I'm not there. I've been out of it for 2 years, 3 years now, 3 years, 2 years. But I know that what we did is we secured a grant from the Metcalf Foundation, which subsidized a lot of the cafe activities. So I don't have exact number for the budget, but I know that we hired a staff person. And we, and something like the condo project was about $60,000 to $70,000. And again, we secured funding for that specifically. So, and yes, you have to build it into the budget, otherwise it just won't happen.
Thank you very much. We have another question for John from Michael Vickers, who is with Akin Collective. So Michael says, thanks so much, John. Why did the board decide not to hire a project manager to oversee? How did you navigate that risk? And also, what's...
So thanks. Good question. I think culturally, and used a small C culture, the museum at the time, the museum board was a very volunteer-driven board, and a lot of the work that was done on the building itself, a lot of the work on the grounds, on the property, the painting and the plastering and installation a lot of it was done by volunteers. And part of that was very much out of necessity, in as much as there was not a lot of money, and they were really running close to the vest. And I suspect that one or more times there's a question as whether or not they're going to be able to complete the project. So I think that's why they went without a project manager, and the board took that responsibility on itself. As far as future things go, I can tell you the one thing that we are looking at is some sort of outside performance space. We have very strong programming at the museum. Because of COVID, a lot of it's moved outside. In addition to that, we have the aforementioned things like weddings, small sort of local concerts, things like that. And we are looking at a structure for next summer, which would be a capital improvement for that. It's sort of a stage type thing built in keeping with the history of the museum, on a barn board, etc. But a bit of a shelter for weddings, small concerts, and our education program.
Great, thank you very much. We have another question for, for Franco from Kate Oxley. So she asks, what was the key to securing such impressive
one of the things that I guess oh, sorry, I shouldn't touch that. Okay, I'm very bad at this. Okay, so one of the things that I mentioned was Jenny Jinder. Someone I mentioned is Jenny Jinder, who really helped me shape the messaging of the feasibility study and the campaign to government. We knew who our audience was. We knew that we weren't going to be able to raise the majority of money privately, and so we had to make a case to our public funders to support the project. It's the first million came from the City of Toronto, and it came through a Section 37 agreement. I don't know if it's worth going into that, but so the first million came from the City of Toronto, and that was that actually was tipped the scales for us in a way, because the province, who was the last to come in, and the federal government were all waiting for the city to make its commitment. So it started with the city. It went to we got a Trillium Foundation grant. Then we got the 1.8 from the federal government through Cultural Spaces, which was a huge surprise. And then the province came in. So that's the sequence. And I don't know if I have I honestly, I don't know if I have a crystal ball. I mean, I don't know. The campaign was 10 years, right? So that also should, the folks at Canadian Heritage said that the Theatre Centre had one of the largest files in Cultural Spaces, because we had applied, I think, 5 or 6 different times with revisions. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm sorry.
And of course, if there's any clarification for questions, we can always connect you with either John or Franco, just as a little note. But thank you very much for that. Another question that we have is also for Franco, from Isabella Stefanescu. Isabella asks, how did you get
the counselor, Anna Bailao, was involved in the urban planning and design of the community. So she was working with Active 18, and so that's how I met her. And really, it's just persistence, just being, calling her and saying, I'd like, and obviously being respectful of her time, but just updating her, and developing a relationship, because part of what the role of the space, convincing her that the space was going to be a public space, that it was going to be a space for the community, and because all these developers were building private spaces where you couldn't enter into them unless you were an owner or you paid, that there were fewer and fewer public spaces in the community, and convincing the councillor that the theatre centre was going to be one of those places where the community could gather, was really important. I got her attention with that narrative, and that worked.
Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we're just coming a little bit up on time, but I know that I can see we have additional questions as well. So what we can do is we will connect you with the presenters and get all of your questions answered via email. So we'll do that after the webinar. And so just to kind of end off for the day, thank you so much to our presenters for your insights and expertise on your experience of securing permanent space. And thank you to everyone for submitting such great questions as well. I'd just now like to take some time to go over some of ArtsBuild Ontario's tools and core programs related to creative spaces, which may be of interest to you. One of our core programs is the Creative Spaces Mentoring Network. This is a mentoring program for cultural leaders in Ontario's arts sector, which focuses on strengthening the business and management skills needed to successfully oversee, renew, and develop creative spaces. The program pairs mentees with a mentor who is an experienced professional in the arts sector. ArtsBuild Ontario will also provide additional training materials and learning opportunities to participants. In 2020 to 2021, this iteration of the program is in full swing, and we look forward to hearing more about the progress of the mentees projects over the course of the next year. And if you didn't have a chance to apply for the program this year, we hope to see you in our 2021 to 22 iteration next year. The Asset Planner for the Arts is another of our core programs. It is a cloud-based asset management program that tracks the condition of your facility assets as well as the replacement costs for key building components. Asset Planner for the Arts is a tool that not only provides you with a more detailed outlook on your project in the moment, but it also offers detailed capital forecasts for the future of your project for the next 30 years with a focus on the next 5 years. For more information on this core program, please contact Diana Moser, Interim Executive Director, at diana@artsbuildontario.ca. I'd also like to talk about one of our tools available to you, which is our Planet Build It tool. This supports arts organizations executing capital projects, and it is a guideline designed to equip arts organizations to plan and execute capital projects with a step-by-step approach. Planet Build It is coordinated with ArtsBuild's resource library to offer access to industry-standard guidelines as well as best practices. In terms of upcoming workshops to look out for with ArtsBuild Ontario, we are in the process of deferring many of our workshops, including Part 1 and Part 2 workshops, which would be on alternate financing, engaging community, building creative spaces and managing them, for Learn It, Build It, Manage It. The safety of our participants during this time is of utmost concern to us, and all updates on this program will be posted on our Learn It, Build It, Manage It page over the coming weeks, so please feel free to check back on that webpage linked when you can. We would also encourage you to please take our evaluation survey for this webinar. Your feedback is extremely important to us as it will help to inform future programs from ArtsBuild Ontario. It should only take about 5 minutes of your time, and we will be sending out a link to the survey following this session. Lastly, we would like to acknowledge our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage and Canada Council for the Arts, for funding this case study webinar series. So in closing, thank you very much again to our presenters, John and Franco, for your detailed presentations. While this Creative Spaces case study webinar series is now complete, we will have more webinars to come from ABO's other projects, such as Learn It, Build It, Manage It, and they will be posted on our website at artsbuildontario.ca. If you have any questions, you can of course contact me. Again, my name is Amy Poole, and you can contact me via email at amy@artsbuildontario.ca. So thank you everyone so much for joining us, and we hope that you all have a great day.